Welcome to the 80s with me, Jamie Fenderson. This episode we're going to talk about 1981. Admittedly, I don't remember 1981, just like I didn't remember 1980. My brain was still forming at this time, but I still was around. But there are a lot of things in 1981 that happened and a lot of popular culture that reverberated throughout the 80s that would affect me later. We flew high in 1981. On April 12th, 1981, the first space shuttle launched. It was called the Columbia. It was built by Rockwell International for NASA, and it launched from the Kennedy Space Center. The mission commander was John Young, who was a moonwalker. He had walked on the moon in 1972. He was on the Gemini and Apollo missions. He had been to space 4 times, so it wasn't Commander Young's first rodeo. And the pilot was astronaut Robert Crippen, who was a Navy test pilot, and he would go on to command 3 future shuttle missions. It had been 6 years since we put a human on space, and on April 12th, they launched this mission, which, incidentally, was 20 years to the day since Yuri Gagarin was the first human in space. So exactly to the day, 20 years later, the Space Shuttle Columbia launched. The Columbia would carry dozens of astronauts into space for 20 or more years. But sadly, on February 1st, 2003, it burned up on re-entry, killing 7 astronauts. There were 6 shuttles altogether for a total of 135 missions. 2 of the shuttles were lost, the Columbia and the Challenger, which we'll discuss in later episodes. And the other 4, the Endeavour, the Discovery, the Atlantis, and the Enterprise, are in museums. The last mission of the Space Shuttle program was on July 21st, 2011. It was the Atlantis. When it landed, that was the end of the Space Shuttle, which is unfortunate because, back then, in the 80s and 90s, we had the Space Shuttle, which was cool. Kids liked it. We had astronauts that were people who worked for the people. We paid them to go into space for us. NASA was for us. Space was for the people. And these space shuttles were our space shuttles. And fast forward to 2023, and all we hear about is like which billionaire is going into space or starting a space company. And although we still have NASA, it's really all we hear about is SpaceX or Jeff Bezos or space tourism for rich people. And I think that's pretty sad because back in the 80s and 90s, space was for everyone. And the space shuttle was cool, and it was our spaceship. It was the people's spaceship. So I'm kind of bummed out that it's gone. I hope that they reinstitute something like it in the future soon and give space back to the people. Let's talk about books a little bit. A couple of popular management books came out. The 1-Minute Manager by Kenneth H. Blanchard and Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In by Roger Fisher. Interestingly, Milo and I did a whole podcast which compares these 2 books. Why? Well, sometimes the wheels of fate give us some interesting things to do, and that's a couple books that we covered. There were a couple spooky books came out. Red Dragon, which is like the first in the series of Hannibal Lecter, kind of his origin story, by Thomas Harris. That came out in 1981. And Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. It has a recognizable book cover of kind of this skull smoking a pipe by a house with a moon and lightning bolts. If you see it, you'll probably know it. So that's an interesting book I want to kind of pick up again. Let's talk about television. So something happened on March 6th, 1981. Walter Cronkite resigned from CBS Evening News after 19 years. And he is replaced by Dan Rather, who I grew up with. But even though I grew up with Dan Rather, I still know Walter Cronkite. So I think he must be pretty famous because I still know about him. I still know him. And he had the famous line, "And that's the way it is." Dan Rather had his line, "That's part of our world tonight." So Dan Rather would go on to anchor CBS Evening News for 24 years, so almost a quarter century. So Dan Rather is who we all grew up. If you're my age, that's who you grew up with listening to the news. On St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1981, the Ropers made their final appearance on Three's Company. They were replaced by Mr. Furley, who was played by Don Knotts. And I wonder why they did this. And I guess there's a number of reasons. One, their contract didn't renew. Two, another reason was they wanted a new fresh face. And Don Knotts pretty fresh. He's a pretty funny guy, so... And they figured that maybe paying one guy was less than paying two. You don't need two landlords, you only need one. And I guess the Ropers had a spin-off. I never heard of it. Let me know if you've ever seen it, because I don't know anything about it. Weird Al Yankovic made his first appearance on TV. On NBC on a show called The Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. Have you ever heard of this show? I've never heard of it. It's one of those variety shows that I never heard of it. May 15th, the third and last Gilligan's Island TV movie aired on NBC. It was called The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island. I remember this. I've watched this. It's as goofy as it sounds. And then on August 1st, MTV debuted on cable TV. I would go into it, but guess what? Yep, Milo and I have a whole podcast episode about this. TV shows that debuted. A couple of shows that debuted were Dynasty and Falcon Crest. Do you remember these kind of high-powered 80s primetime soap opera kind of shows? These were two of the most famous ones, Dynasty and Falcon Crest. I don't know if I've ever watched them, or I haven't watched them much, aside from like maybe my aunt used to watch them and I had to if I was hanging out with her. But for some reason I have the theme songs stuck in my head. I know the theme songs. Speaking of theme songs, one with a good theme song that debuted in 1981 was Hill Street Blues. Another great theme song appeared on this show, which debuted in 1981, The Greatest American Hero. Some others, The Smurfs, Entertainment Tonight, Gimme a Break, Simon and Simon, and The Fall Guy, which I do remember this show because it's one of the earlier TV shows that I remember because it's just a lot of fun. It's definitely a little boy show from the 80s. Do you remember this show? You Can't Do That on Television was a show that aired on Nickelodeon, and it came out that year. I loved that show. It's a Canadian show, and it had slime, and I remember for some reason my grandma thought that I shouldn't watch it because it's from the devil, which made me want to watch it even more. Anything my grandma said was from the devil made me want to check it out. Some shows that ended this year were Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which I do remember, and I loved that show, and it was short-lived, and it shouldn't have been because it was really fun. Soap, Charlie's Angels, and The Waltons. So that's what was up with TV in 1981. Let's move on to movies. The top grossing film, you might have heard of this movie. I don't know. We'll see. It's a little movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. Made $1981, $212 million, $1981. Fantastic adventure film. Loads of fun. Guess what? Milo and I have a whole retrospective podcast about Raiders of the Lost Ark. You should listen to it. We kind of dive deep for about 25 minutes or so into this fantastic adventure film. They've made a new one recently. I haven't seen it because I don't think the new ones are good, but they're still trying to milk it. But back then they were really good, and this was the one that started it all. This is the one that started the whole like Laura Croft and the archaeologist turned adventurer genre. This started the whole thing. And notice it's called Raiders of the Lost Ark, not Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. But you might have seen it that way because in 1999 they released a video package and they wanted to have it consistent, so they put Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. But you'll also still notice that it's just Raiders of the Lost Ark on the screen. They didn't pull a Star Wars episode, nothing, New Hope, anything like that. They kept it the way it is, which is good. I don't think you should mess with movies like this because it's a masterpiece. It's a Mona Lisa. You shouldn't paint a mustache on it. You know what I'm saying? The Academy Award for Best Picture this year, 1981, went to Chariots of Fire, which won 3 others as well. Best Original Screenplay, Best Costume Design, and, probably most famously, Best Original Score. Do you remember this song? Vangelis had his electronic theme for Chariots of Fire. Dun 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 dun. Every time you just hear it and you just want to run in slow motion toward your goal, right? That's when I hear Chariots of Fire by Vangelis. I just want to run in slow motion toward a goal. Number 2 at the box office was a film I've never heard of. It's called On Golden Pond. Have you ever heard of it? Maybe I missed it because it's a romantic drama with old people. It's not really an 80s boy movie, but it is pretty star-studded, I guess. It's got Henry Fonda and daughter Jane Fonda. You might know her from the fitness videos. And the great Katharine Hepburn. So this is a kind of a big deal for a movie. I just never knew about it because I was a kid in the 80s. But now that I'm an adult, I think I'm going to watch this because I might like it because I'm old now. So I might dig it. I might appreciate it. So I'm going to watch it. I'll let you know how I did. Other top 10 films, Superman 2, which I think is the best Superman movie. Cannonball Run, lots of fun. Arthur, which was kind of a surprise hit, but it was a fun movie. Time Bandits. I didn't know that was in the top 10. I thought that was maybe an under the radar kind of B movie, but it was number 10. Stripes. Remember, this is the 80s. Comedies could still be big. And then there were 2 others I haven't heard of that I want to research more, maybe watch. For Your Eyes Only and The Four Seasons. Other notables or under the radar movies that popped out to me: An American Werewolf in London. This one, I love this one. Caveman. Have you ever seen this movie? It stars Ringo Starr and Shelley Long. It's a goofy comedy. It's really stupid, but loads of fun. I remember this movie, and it's a blast. You should watch this if you haven't seen it. Clash of the Titans. Awesome cult classic. Ray Harryhausen, stop motion effects. Awesome movie. I love this movie. I watch it at least once every year. I've seen it a trillion times. Enter the Ninja. I think maybe this was the first ninja movie of the 80s and one of the ninja craze kickstarters of the 80s. John Carpenter's classic Escape from New York with Kurt Russell. Fantastic. A slow burner cult classic, The Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi classic starring Bruce Campbell. Strange movie, but it's become part of our culture. It's awesome. The raunchy sex comedy started its kind of debut with Porky's. I don't know if Porky's was the first, but it's definitely the queen mother of raunchy sex comedies. And The Road Warrior, which is the sequel to Mad Max. I think this is the film that brought Mel Gibson in and cemented him as a A-list actor in the United States. Let's move on to music. Number 1 on the Billboard Top Hot 100, Betty Davis Eyes by Kim Carnes. Kind of maybe the first kind of synth rocky, new wave kind of song that made it to the top. It's a great song, very karaokeable. Number 2 was Endless Love by Diana Ross and Lionel Richie. This is what you play when you want a girl to know you're into her. You play this in the background, that's gonna do it. By the way, going back to Kim Carnes, she did a collaboration with Kenny Rogers that same year, and they had a Grammy nomination for a duet they did called Don't Fall in Love with a Dreamer. It's pretty good advice. Number 5 was Jesse's Girl. I mentioned this one because this is part of my son's 80s little kid soundtrack of songs that he used to love hearing in the car and sing along with back when he was little. This is back when his music tastes were mine because he was a kid and he could listen to the things that I like to listen to and like it. It's not so much anymore. He's got his own taste, but back in the day, we had our own playlist, and Jesse's Girl was on that playlist. I miss those times. Number 6 was Celebration by Kool and the Gang. I love this song. This is the ultimate party song. Celebrate good times, come on. Do 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 do. It's a celebration. You have to play this like on a New Year's Eve party. And I'll tell you a story about this one. This used to play often at a club I used to hang out at in the 90s with my then girlfriend, now ex-wife, called Castillo, where they played a lot of this fun early 80s kind of party music. So I love this song. 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. Definitely on any office worker soundtrack. And it's interesting because Sheena Easton had the track of number 12 on the top 100, and it was also called 9 to 5, but it wasn't about work. It was about a train. So it's alternate title that they have because they didn't want to have Sheena Easton's 9 to 5 confused with Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 is called Morning Train, which is what it goes by mostly now because it's number 12 and not number 9. Incidentally, Sheena Easton had 2 others on the list. Number 92, For Your Eyes Only, and number 95, Modern Girl. Number 11 was Believe It or Not by Joey Scarberry. This is the theme from The Greatest American Hero, which debuted this year. We just talked about that. This is one of the few TV themes that went big. This is a great song. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. Remember that song? So this was a theme song for a TV show, and it's one of the few that actually made it really big on the charts. This was a very popular song in 1981. It may be even more popular than the TV show itself. Others from the top 100. So John Lennon had 3 songs: Starting Over, Woman, and Watching the Wheels. Remember, he had died in 1980. He was murdered by a deranged fan. But 3 of his songs hit the charts in 1981. Pat Benatar had a couple of great hits. Number 46 was Hit Me With Your Best Shot, Fire Away. And number 83 was Treat Me Right. Juice Newton had 3. Queen of Hearts, Angel of the Morning, and Suddenly, which she did with Cliff Richard. And Blondie was big in 1981. Number 15 was Rapture, and just below that, number 17 was The Tide is High. So they had 2 top 20 hits that year next to each other. Some of my faves, Whip It, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, whip it good, doo-doo-doo. When the problem comes around, you must whip it. This song's goofy, and the video is even more, it's weird. They got these weird bucket hats on. It's Whip It by Devo, which was number 94. Barely made the list, but it made it. It's goofy. It's a goofy song, but I love it. Number 62 was America by Neil Diamond. We had this on our July 4th playlist. We had an episode where we had an Independence Day playlist from the 80s and 90s, and this was definitely on it. It's about immigrants coming to America, kicking ass in America. And then there's another song I want to mention that I really like. I'm coming out. I want the world to know. Got to let it show. I'm coming out. Number 98 by Diana Ross. I thought that'd be higher. So I guess this kind of a slow burner because you still hear this song around. This is another party song that you'd hear with Celebration maybe. And you hear it in commercials. You hear it's often the background song for things nowadays. So it's pretty popular. And if you're wondering what the number 100 was, it's Time is Time by Andy Gibb. Yeah, the Bee Gees Andy Gibb. He had gone solo. And he had the number 100 song. I didn't know this. He died in 1988 at age 30. Andy Gibb did. His heart failed him after he had a long issue with drug abuse, and I think his heart finally just kind of went out on him. So that's kind of sad, but at least he still had a top 100 song. If you want to know my least favorite song of 1981, the worst song in my opinion, and we had an episode where I talked about overrated bands, and I think the Police are overrated. Maybe you hate me now for saying that, but number 57 on this list was Dee Do 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 Dee Da Da Da. It's a stupid song. Dee Do Do Da Da. It's babies. It's baby music. It's stupid. I'm sorry, if you're a fan of the Police, that's cool. I can understand why. I'm not going to knock you for it. If they're pretty catchy, I dig it, but this kind of pseudo reggae baby music just isn't my thing. It's not my thing. I'm sorry to say it. So if you're a fan of the Police, I'm sorry. I don't dislike you cuz I'm okay with it. Like I get it. But this is a dumb song. So even if you like the Police, you got to admit this is kind of a dumb song. And if you think it's not, tell me why. Anywho, that's what's up, 1981. You have anything to say about 1981? Let me know. You can go to the 80sand90s.com or catch me on an email, info@the80sand90s.com, or drop a comment on wherever you're listening to this podcast. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in 1982.